Beyoncé just did the one thing the entire music industry spent 25 years swearing was impossible. And she did it in front of the same people who watched her get passed over, night after night, year after year, while holding trophies they admitted she deserved. But that Grammy moment is not even the real story. Because behind that standing ovation sits a vault of receipts the blogs never dared to lay side by side. An elevator camera that caught 4 minutes the most protected family in music prayed you would forget. An album of confessions so raw it nearly detonated a billion-dollar marriage on live television. A courtroom battle that swallowed 2 years of headlines and ended with a dismissal almost nobody read past the headline of. And a fortune so large that Forbes had to redraw the map of what an entertainer is even allowed to become. Stay locked in, because by the time this video ends, you are going to understand why every rival, every label executive, and every hater with a podcast quietly agrees on one thing they will never say into a microphone. The throne was never attacked and survived. The throne was attacked and grew. Because if there is one thing the whole world understands about Beyoncé, it is that nothing around Beyoncé ever happens by accident. For more than 2 decades, every move, every silence, every sudden midnight album drop has been engineered with the precision of a military campaign. And standing beside her through all of it is a man who came from the Marcy projects in Brooklyn with nothing but a demo tape and a refusal to take no for an answer. Jay-Z did not find doors waiting open for him. He built his own building and started charging rent. Together, they did not just climb to the top of music. They bought the mountain, renamed it, and started selling tickets to the view. But here is where the story stops being a fairy tale and starts being a blueprint. Because the Carters did not get here by avoiding war. They got here by winning every single one. And most of those wars were fought in rooms you were never invited into. Some of them were fought in rooms that had security cameras. And one of them, the most famous 4 minutes in celebrity history, we are going to walk through frame by frame. So do not touch that dial. Let us rewind to where this empire actually begins, because the origin story is more calculated than you think. Beyoncé Giselle Knowles was not discovered. She was constructed, and I mean that as the highest compliment possible. Her father Matthew Knowles quit a 6-figure corporate sales job to manage a Houston girl group that went through names, members, and record deals like most kids go through sneakers. Destiny's Child survived lineup chaos that would have vaporized any normal group, lawsuits from former members, and the brutal economics of late 90s R&B. And they came out the other side as one of the best-selling female groups in the history of recorded music. That is not luck. That is a family treating talent like a startup and treating the music business like a hostile takeover in progress. And while Beyoncé was becoming the engine of that machine, Sean Carter was running a parallel play that the industry still studies. Rejected by every major label, he co-founded Rockefeller Records and sold records out of the trunk until the industry had no choice but to write him a check on his terms. Reasonable Doubt was not just an album. It was a declaration that ownership beats applause. Every career move after that, Rocawear, the presidency of Def Jam, the 40/40 clubs, followed the same doctrine. Do not rent the culture. Own it. And understand something about the scale we are talking about, because people throw the word icon around so casually, it has almost lost meaning. As of 2025, Beyoncé holds 35 Grammy wins and 99 nominations, the most awarded and most nominated artist in the history of the entire ceremony, male or female, any genre, any era. Nobody has more. Not the legends your parents grew up on, not the rock gods, not the orchestras. A woman from Houston who started in a girl group managed out of a family living room now sits on top of a record that may genuinely never be broken, because to break it, someone would have to dominate for a quarter century without a single commercial or critical collapse. And here is the part that should make every industry executive lose sleep. She did it while owning the building. Because that is the detail that separates this empire from every other superstar story you have ever heard. Michael had the sales, but not the ownership for most of his life. The biggest pop acts of the streaming era rent their masters and split their touring with management firms that take their cut before the artist sees a dime. Beyoncé looked at that entire system in 2010 and walked away from it. Parkwood Entertainment is not a vanity office with her name on the door. It is a full-scale production company, management firm, film studio, and tour operation, and it means that when a Beyoncé tour grosses $400 million, the revenue flows through her own company first. Every decision, every contract, every camera angle in a concert film, every dollar of merchandise, one woman sits at the top of that chain. When Forbes certified her billionaire status, they pointed directly at that structure as the reason. Not just the fame, the plumbing. And Jay-Z was running the same playbook on an even wider field. This is a man whose business card, if he bothered to carry one, would need 2 sides and small print. Rock Nation manages superstar athletes and A-list artists. The entertainment division books the biggest live events on the planet. His liquor portfolio alone, the champagne and cognac stakes, generated exits that would be career-defining for any normal mogul, and for him, they were line items. There is a reason business publications cover him in the same tone they cover tech founders. He is not a rapper with investments. He is an investor who happens to have 24 Grammys in the drawer. Now, people always ask the same question when they hear numbers like this. Why them? Why did these two specific people end up running the table when 1,000 other talented acts from the same era are doing casino residencies and nostalgia tours? And the answer is hiding in a pattern you will see repeat through this entire story, so lock it in now. Every other superstar sells moments. The Carters sell moments and keep the infrastructure. The Super Bowl performance, the festival headline set, the surprise album, those are moments, and other artists hand them over to promoters and networks. Beyoncé filmed her own Coachella performance with her own crew, produced by her own company, and sold the documentary and the live album herself. Jay-Z did not just headline festivals. He started one. See the difference? The moments fade. The infrastructure compounds. And that compounding is why the gap between the Carters and everyone else does not close with time. It widens. Now pay attention to what happens next, because this is the moment the two machines decide to merge. Around 2002, a collaboration called 03 Bonnie and Clyde drops, and suddenly the biggest woman in R&B and the sharpest businessman in hip-hop are standing in the same frame. The chemistry was obvious. The strategy was even more obvious. For years they refused to confirm anything, and that refusal was not shyness. That was scarcity marketing applied to a relationship. When they finally married in April 2008, it was a private ceremony so locked down that the world learned about it the way the world learns about everything from this family. Exactly when Beyoncé and Jay-Z decided the world was ready to know. And that, right there, is the first law of the Carter Empire. Control the narrative or the narrative controls you. Remember that law? Because 6 years later, on a Monday night in May 2014, that law faced its single greatest stress test, and it happened inside a metal box with a camera bolted to the ceiling. The Met Gala, the Standard Hotel, an after-party elevator carrying Jay-Z, Beyoncé, her sister Solange, and a security guard. The doors close, and for the next several minutes, the world would eventually see footage of Solange swinging, kicking, and lunging at the most powerful man in hip-hop, while a bodyguard fought to hold her back, and while Beyoncé stood between them, mostly still, mostly watching, composed in a way that launched 1,000 conspiracy boards. No audio ever surfaced. No explanation ever fully landed. Days later, the family released a statement so carefully worded it belongs in a museum of crisis management. They acknowledged the incident. They called it a private family matter. They said everyone had moved forward. And then they never spoke about it in detail again. Think about how impossible that is. In an era where a celebrity sneezes and 3 outlets publish think pieces before lunch, the most explosive physical altercation in modern celebrity history, captured on video, leaked worldwide, and the family answered it with 1 paragraph and total silence. And it worked. The story burned for weeks and then suffocated, because the Carters refused to feed it oxygen. Whatever was said in that elevator stays in that elevator. And whatever caused it, the public only got one real clue, delivered not in an interview, not in a statement, but in an album that detonated 2 years later and changed confessional music forever. April 2016. Lemonade. If you were anywhere near the internet that night, you remember the shockwave. HBO visuals, baseball bats, fire, poetry, and a question hanging over every frame. Was the most famous marriage in music cracking open in front of us? Beyoncé sang about betrayal with a specificity that did not sound like fiction. She sang about the other woman with a nickname that sent the internet into a manhunt so aggressive that innocent people had to publicly clear their own names. She sang about her father, her ancestors, her rage, her forgiveness, and by the final act she sang about redemption. It was not gossip. It was a document. And it was the most audacious act of narrative control in pop history, because instead of letting tabloids drip the story out over months, Beyoncé seized the entire tragedy, packaged it as art, and sold it back to the world on her own terms. But here is what most coverage missed at the time, and what makes this a 2-person empire story instead of a 1-person meltdown. 13 months later, Jay-Z answered. The album 444 arrived in June 2017, and the title track was something hip-hop had almost never seen from a man of his stature. A public confession. He owned the infidelity in his own words. He admitted he nearly lost the best thing in his life. He rapped about therapy, about ego, about watching his wife suffer and knowing he was the cause. In interviews around that album, he said plainly that the two of them had used their art almost like a therapy session, and that the pain in Lemonade was real, and so was his shame. Whatever you think of him, understand the strategic genius underneath the emotion. Two people took the single worst crisis a marriage can face and converted it into two critically adored albums, one joint tour after another, and a narrative of survival that made their bond look bulletproof. They did not hide the fire. They sold tickets to it. And then they did the boldest thing of all. In 2018, as the Carters, they released Everything Is Love, a victory lap recorded like a coronation. The message was unmistakable. We survived. We are richer than you think. And we are more united than you hoped we would not be. The Louvre shut down so they could film a video in front of the Mona Lisa, and honestly, that detail tells you everything about where the power dynamic between celebrity and institution had shifted. Museums do not close for stars. They closed for Beyoncé and Jay-Z. Now, I need you to hold that image, the two of them standing in front of the most famous painting on earth, because we are about to pivot from the marriage wars to the money wars, and this is where the story gets almost absurd. Remember the law. Control the narrative. Well, there is a second law, and it is the one Jay-Z has been preaching since the trunk of the car days. Ownership beats everything. In 2010, Beyoncé did something that quietly rewired the entire economics of superstardom. She founded Parkwood Entertainment and brought nearly every piece of her career in-house. Management, production, films, tours, merch, the works. Most artists rent their careers from labels and management firms, paying everyone else first and keeping the leftovers. Beyoncé flipped the model. Parkwood became the studio, the label brain, the film company, and the tour operation, all under one roof, all answering to one person. That single decision is the reason the numbers we are about to discuss are even possible. Jay-Z, meanwhile, was assembling what business schools will eventually teach as the Carter portfolio. Roc Nation grew from a label into an entertainment and sports management powerhouse. The Dust Cognac stake turned into a colossal payday when he sold half of it to Bacardi in 2023 after a legal fight over valuation. A fight he won so decisively that the sale price confirmed the brand was worth billions. His Armand de Brignac champagne stake had already gone to LVMH in 2021. Tidal, the streaming service he bought and relaunched with a stage full of the most famous artists alive, sold its majority stake to Jack Dorsey's Block. Piece by piece, deal by deal, Forbes crowned him the first billionaire in hip-hop history back in 2019, and by the middle of this decade estimates placed his fortune around $2.5 billion. From Marcy to the 3 Club. Say that sentence slowly, because it does not get less insane the more you hear it. But empires this big do not rise without friction, and the friction is where the public gets let back in. Because not every Carter war was fought in an elevator or a recording booth. Some of them were fought in press releases, on awards show stages, and in courtrooms, and the receipts from those battles tell you more about power in modern music than any diss track ever could. And the first one we have to talk about is a grudge that lasted more than a decade, between the biggest star alive and the institution that claims to honor excellence in music, the Grammys. Here is a stat that should be illegal. For years, Beyoncé held the record as the most awarded artist in Grammy history, dozens of golden gramophones, and yet the biggest prize in the building, Album of the Year, kept slipping past her like it was allergic. I Am Sasha Fierce Lost. The self-titled visual album, the one that changed how the entire industry releases music, lost. Lemonade, a cultural event so significant it is taught in university courses, lost to a record that, with respect, even its own winner seemed stunned to see take the crown that night. And every single time, the cameras cut to Beyoncé's face, gracious, applauding, composed, because that is the Carter doctrine. You do not show the wound. You weaponize it later. And the later arrived. In 2023, her husband walked onto that same Grammy stage to accept a global impact honor. And instead of delivering the polite thank you speech everyone expected, Jay-Z used his moment to say the quiet part into a live microphone with his daughter standing beside him. He called out the Recording Academy directly. He pointed out that his wife had won more Grammys than anyone in history and had never won Album of the Year, and he asked the room, essentially, how that math was supposed to make sense. The audience laughed nervously. The clip ran for weeks. And whether the Academy wants to admit it or not, that speech lit a fuse. Because when the nominations for the 2025 Grammys dropped, Cowboy Carter led everything with 11 nominations, the most nominated album of her entire career. And on that February night in Los Angeles, the fuse finally reached the powder. Beyoncé won Best Country Album, becoming the first black woman ever to take that trophy. And then came the moment a generation of fans had been waiting on for more than a decade. Album of the Year. Cowboy Carter. Beyonce. The room erupted like the building itself had been holding its breath. And her speech was not a victory lap. It was a lesson. She spoke about genre being, in her words, a cold word used to keep artists in their place. She dedicated the moment to the pioneers who had been shut out of country music's front door long before she arrived. It was gracious and it was pointed at the exact same time, which is the hardest trick in public life, and she makes it look like breathing. Now, to really understand what that win meant, you have to understand what the industry had done to her on the way there. When Cowboy Carter arrived in March 2024, it was not a costume. Beyonce said herself the album was born out of an experience where she did not feel welcomed, and it was clear to anyone paying attention that the cold shoulder came from parts of the country establishment. The Country Music Association Awards shut her out entirely, 0 nominations, despite the album producing a chart-topping single and forcing the entire genre to have a conversation about its own history. Texas Hold 'Em went to #1 on the country chart, making her the first black woman to top it with a country song, and still the genre's biggest award show acted like she did not exist. So she did what Carters do. She did not complain. She built a tour. And this is where the numbers stop being impressive and start being historic. The Cowboy Carter Tour hit stadiums in 2025, 32 shows, and by the time the dust settled, Billboard Box Score confirmed the gross at roughly $407 million from 1.6 million tickets, breaking more than 40 venue records along the way. Pollstar named it the top tour of the entire year. Think about what just happened there. The genre that would not nominate her watched her turn country music into the highest-grossing tour in its history. That is not a comeback. That is a conquest with a receipts folder. And do not forget, this came right on the heels of the Renaissance World Tour in 2023, 56 dates, 2.7 million fans, $579 million worldwide, the highest-grossing tour ever by a female artist at that point. 2 tours, 2 different genres, back-to-back, both rewriting the record books. And while all of this was happening, Forbes was doing the quiet arithmetic in the background, and in December 2025 the verdict landed. Beyonce had officially crossed $1 billion in net worth, built on her music ownership, her tours, and Parkwood's total control of the machine. She joined her husband in a club so exclusive that the two of them are basically the entertainment wing of it. Combined, the Carters sit on a fortune estimated around $3.5 billion. 2 kids from Houston and Brooklyn, worth more than some small economies. But hold on, because we need to talk about the war that nearly nobody outside the sports world fully understood, and it shows you exactly how Jay-Z converts outrage into infrastructure. In 2019, Roc Nation signed a sweeping partnership with the NFL, and the backlash was instant and volcanic. Colin Kaepernick had been frozen out of the league after kneeling against police brutality, and here was Jay-Z, who had worn Kaepernick's jersey and told the league in his lyrics exactly what he thought of it, shaking hands with the Shield. Critics called it a sellout. Activists called it a betrayal. Commentators lined up to write the obituary of his credibility. And here is what actually happened. Jay-Z took the meeting, took the criticism, and built Inspire Change, a social justice initiative that has directed hundreds of millions of dollars into education, economic advancement, and criminal justice reform programs. Roc Nation took over the league's live music entertainment, which means the Super Bowl halftime show, the biggest stage in American television, now runs through the Carter pipeline. Kendrick Lamar's halftime performance, Rihanna's, Usher's, the whole modern era of the halftime show as a cultural event, that infrastructure flows through the deal the internet said would destroy him. You do not have to love the deal. You do not have to forgive the deal. But you cannot argue with the blueprint, because once again the pattern repeated. Absorb the hit. Control the asset. Let the results argue for you. Now we arrive at the darkest chapter of this entire story, and I want to be precise here, because this is the part the blogs turned into a feeding frenzy and the facts got buried under the frenzy. In December 2024, a civil lawsuit filed by an anonymous accuser alleged that Jay-Z, along with Sean Combs, had assaulted her at a party in the year 2000 when she was 13. The allegations were horrific, the headlines were global within hours, and for a moment, it looked like the most untouchable name in music was facing the scandal that no amount of narrative control could outrun. But Jay-Z did something almost no celebrity in his position ever does. Instead of a quiet settlement and a softer headline, he went to war in public. He released a statement through Roc Nation that did not use the language of crisis PR. He called the suit a blackmail attempt. He named the attorney behind it, Tony Busby, and accused him of running an extortion operation dressed up as litigation. He said the real victims were his family, and he dared the accusations to move from civil court to criminal court, where the standard of proof is higher and the stakes for false claims are real. It was a scorched earth defense, and legal experts went on television to say they had rarely seen anything like it. And then the thing happened that the internet never dwells on. In February 2025, the accuser's own attorneys voluntarily dismissed the lawsuit. Dismissed. Gone. The story that had generated weeks of apocalyptic headlines ended not with a verdict, not with a settlement, but with the case evaporating entirely. Jay-Z called it a victory and filed his own defamation and extortion suit against Busby. And although a California judge later dismissed that countersuit on First Amendment grounds, Jay-Z took the fight to an appeals court. Because if there is one thing this man has proven across 30 years, it is that he does not leave a battle unfinished. Whatever you read on any of it, the documented record is the record. The accusation collapsed. The counterattack continues. And through the entire storm, Beyonce never issued a public word, appeared beside him when it mattered, and kept the machine moving, which tells you that the Carter Crisis playbook has exactly one rule that outranks all others. Never let the scandal set the schedule. And let me put a finer point on the halftime show piece, because it is the perfect case study in how this playbook actually operates. Before the Roc Nation deal, the Super Bowl halftime show was a prestige slot that networks and the league controlled completely. Artists performed for exposure, not money, and the league owned the moment. Then Jay-Z's company slid into the driver's seat of the entertainment programming, and suddenly the halftime show became a curated cultural statement, the kind of television event that dominates a full week of discourse. The league got relevance with an audience it was bleeding. Jay-Z got the pipeline. And the artists who step onto that stage now do it inside a system that flows through his shop. Whether you think that is genius or you think it is a compromise, you cannot deny the scoreboard, because the man the internet tried to cancel over that deal is now structurally embedded in the biggest sporting event in America. That is not surviving a backlash. That is absorbing it into the foundation. And notice the timing discipline, because this is the part of the Carter playbook almost nobody talks about. When the elevator footage leaked, they waited days, released one paragraph, and went silent. When the lawsuit hit in December 2024, the response came fast, furious, and through official channels. Then the public posture went quiet again while the lawyers worked. Fast when speed helps, frozen when silence helps, and never, ever emotional on the record. Crisis management firms charge millions to teach that discipline, and their clients still fail at it weekly. The Carters have run it flawlessly for over 2 decades, through a scandal environment that has vaporized careers far smaller and far more careful than theirs. There is a reason every young star with a PR problem gets told to study them. The study never ends, because the playbook keeps winning. And one more thing about that playbook, because it applies directly to everything you just heard. The Carters never argue with the internet. They answer with artifacts. An album, a deal, a tour gross, a court filing. Every response is something that can be counted, verified, and filed in the record, which means every response ages well. Outrage evaporates in a week. Artifacts sit in the public record forever, quietly winning the argument long after the argument is over. So step back and look at the whole board. A marriage that survived a filmed elevator fight and a confessed betrayal and converted both into era-defining art. A business empire spanning music, spirits, streaming, sports, and live entertainment that Forbes values in the billions. A Grammy grudge nursed for over a decade and settled on the biggest stage with a speech about genre and gatekeepers that people will quote for years. A partnership with the most powerful sports league on earth that turned a cancellation campaign into a permanent seat at the table. An illegal ambush that was supposed to be the kill shot, dismissed, countered, and appealed. Every single time the industry predicted the fall, the Carters converted the hit into altitude. But here is the part of the story the highlight reels always skip, and honestly it might be the most important section of this entire video. Because if the Carter story were nothing but victories, it would be boring, and worse, it would be fake. Every level of this empire was purchased with a loss, a humiliation, or a risk the entire industry thought was insane at the time. Let us count them honestly. Destiny's Child lost members, got sued, and became a punchline before it became a legend. Jay-Z could not get a single label to sign him, which is exactly why the ownership doctrine exists. Rejection built Rockefeller. The elevator footage was the most embarrassing celebrity leak of its decade, and the answer was a silence every expert said would fail, right up until it worked. Lemonade was a gamble that put a private betrayal on the biggest stage in the world, and 444 required the most powerful man in hip-hop to stand in front of the world and say the words "I failed her," knowing the internet would meme his shame forever. He did it anyway, and it became the most respected album of his career. The NFL deal torched his credibility with the very community that crowned him, and he signed it anyway because he believed the infrastructure mattered more than the applause. Cowboy Carter was mocked before it was heard, shut out of the genre's own award show entirely, and it ended with the Album of the Year speech and the highest-grossing tour in country music history. Do you see the pattern yet? Every loss was tuition. Every humiliation was converted into an asset. That is not luck, and it is not protection. That is a discipline so rare most people cannot recognize it even when it is standing in front of them holding 35 Grammys. And that is why the haters, and there are entire channels devoted to hating this family, have never landed a permanent hit. You call her overrated, and the response is the most Grammy wins in history and back-to-back record-shattering tours in 2 different genres. You call him a sellout, and the response is hundreds of millions deployed into social justice programs and a permanent seat at the biggest table in American sports. You call the marriage fake, and the response is 2 confessional albums, a joint record, and 2 decades of showing up. The receipts always answer. Sometimes they take years to arrive, but they always arrive with documentation. There is also a lesson hiding here for anyone building anything, whether you make music, run a channel, or just want to understand how power actually works in the attention economy. The Carters understood 20 years ago what most celebrities still do not understand today. Attention is not the asset. Ownership of the systems that capture attention is the asset. When Beyonce trends, Parkwood profits. When Jay-Z trends, Rock Nation profits. The internet thinks it is watching drama. It is actually watching a masterclass in conversion running in real time for 25 consecutive years. So when you hear the whispers, and there are always whispers, that the empire is smoke and mirrors, ask the whisperer one question. Where's the evidence? Because the public record points in exactly one direction, and it has pointed that direction since a girl group in Houston and a hustler in Brooklyn decided the industry did not get to decide their worth. They decided it themselves. And then they made the industry pay for the privilege of watching. And that brings us to right now, 2026. And the reason this story is not a retrospective but a live wire. Because the Carters are doing something almost no empire in entertainment history has managed at this altitude. They are getting bigger. The joint appearances that used to be rationed like state secrets are suddenly everywhere. They walked the 2026 Met Gala carpet together with Blue Ivy, a full family formation that shut the internet down for a night. They turned the World Cup final at MetLife Stadium into a date night, sitting in full view of hundreds of millions of viewers like 2 people who have absolutely nothing left to prove and every intention of enjoying the view. Beyonce was spotted outside the Rock Nation offices in New York showing quiet, deliberate public support, the kind of appearance that is never, ever accidental in this family. Every single one of those images is a message, and the message is unity, longevity, and control. And zoom out for a second, because there is a bigger picture forming here that goes beyond one family. What Beyonce and Jay-Z have actually built is a template the entire next generation of artists is trying to copy, and almost none of them can, because the template requires something money cannot buy. Time. 25 years of consecutive correct decisions. 1 decade of dominance makes you a legend. 2 makes you an institution. The Carters are 25 years deep and still setting records in new genres, and that does not just happen. The surprise releases never leak. The tours never have a scandal. And when a lawsuit does come, it gets answered with a legal strategy so aggressive the opposing case simply evaporates. That consistency has created something almost no celebrity brand in history has achieved. Trust from institutions. The Louvre closed for them. The NFL partnered with them. The Recording Academy, after a decade of tension, handed them the biggest prize in music. Forbes certified both fortunes. And here is the irony every critic should sit with. The family supposedly protected by smoke and mirrors turned out to be protected by something far more powerful. A track record. You cannot fake 25 years of receipts. You cannot Photoshop a billion-dollar certification. The record is the record. Now, I know some of you are thinking, fine, but what about the people they outmaneuvered to get here? Fair question, because no empire rises in a vacuum. The Carter story is not a saint story. It is a power story, and power stories always have casualties. The question is whether they played dirty, and after 2.5 decades of the most aggressive scrutiny in entertainment history, the documented record shows lawsuits dismissed, accusations collapsed, and rivals eventually sharing stages with the family that owns the building. That, more than any Grammy or any valuation, is the truest measure of the empire. Not that nobody ever attacked it. That everyone who attacked it eventually had to reckon with the fact that the throne was never built on hype. It was built on results, and results do not have a rebuttal. Meanwhile, the 3rd generation is already loading. Blue Ivy is not a celebrity kid anymore. She is a Grammy-winning performer who danced on 2 world tours in front of millions, walked the Met carpet, and has more stage experience before adulthood than most artists get in a lifetime. The twins are being raised inside the most sophisticated media operation in entertainment. This is not a family. This is a dynasty building its next 50 years in plain sight. And the most telling part is that the public has watched every step of it without ever being told a single thing the family did not choose to release. So now I want to hear from you, because this is where the debate actually lives. When you look at the totality of the Carter playbook, the silent strategy after the elevator, the confessional albums, the business acquisitions, the Grammy reckoning, the Courtroom scorched earth, the billion-dollar fortunes, do you see the greatest empire building in the history of entertainment? Or do you see the most sophisticated image protection operation ever constructed? Because honestly, a case can be made for both, and the comments on this one are going to be a war zone. Drop your verdict below. Team Genius or Team Machine? Pick a side and defend it. And if you think the Cowboy Carter conquest was the peak, tell me what you believe comes next, because every signal says the next Carter era is already in motion. And one more thing before you go. Remember the law we started with. Control the narrative, or the narrative controls you. 25 years, an elevator, a confession, a courtroom, a genre war, and $3.5 billion later, Beyonce and Jay-Z have never once broken that law. Not once. The throne was never defended. The throne was expanded. And if the whispers about what Jay-Z has cooking behind the Roc Nation curtain right now are even half true, the next chapter of this empire is going to make everything you just heard look like the warm-up act. That story is already in the works. So make sure you are subscribed and locked in, because when it drops, you are going to want to say you were here before the rest of the internet caught up. Until then, keep your eyes on the crown. It never slipped. It just kept getting heavier. And somehow, impossibly, they keep carrying it like it weighs nothing at all.